Hey everyone, welcome back. You want to take a closer look at what's happening with the Taliban in Afghanistan, specifically their policies toward women. So we're diving into some news from December 2024. It's about the UN's response to the Taliban's crackdown on women working for NGOs. We've got a lot of reports, but the one we're really focusing on is a DW News article from December 31st, 2024. It's called UN Taliban Ban on Afghan Women in NGOs Absolutely Wrong. Here's where things get really interesting. When the Taliban came back into power in 2021, they talked about a more moderate approach. But what they're doing, especially when it comes to women and girls, paints a very different picture, wouldn't you say?
Yeah, absolutely. There's been a clear trend of stricter and stricter policies. They said that banning girls from education after elementary school was only temporary, but unfortunately it's still in place. And then you have the limitations on women in public spaces, bans on singing and poetry recitals,
Yeah.
and there's a general push for veiling. It makes you wonder what's really going on here.
Yeah, it does feel like they're intentionally rolling back freedoms. And now this ban on women working for NGOs is getting the world's attention. Didn't this actually start back in December 2022?
That's right. It was first banned in December 2022, but it was brought up again and enforced more strongly this December. The Economy Ministry even sent out a circular curve threatening to take away licenses from NGOs that don't follow the ban. This is a big deal because NGOs play a huge role in Afghanistan.
Right, I was just going to ask about that. Why are NGOs so important in this situation?
Well, the humanitarian situation in Afghanistan is already pretty bad. NGOs are like a lifeline for millions of people. They provide essential services and aid. This ban seriously messes with their ability to do their work, which could have terrible effects on the Afghan people.
That's a scary thought. How has the UN reacted to all of this?
The UN is obviously really worried. The UN Human Rights Chief, Volker Turk, has been speaking out against it, calling the ban absolutely the wrong path. He emphasized that this ban not only hurts the Afghan people, but it also holds the country back from making any progress. He said, no country can progress politically, economically, or socially while excluding half of its population from public life. And I think that really gets to the heart of the matter.
It's hard to disagree with that logic. It seems like the UN and the rest of the world are in a difficult position. They want to work with the Taliban, but they also have to condemn what the Taliban is doing. How are they handling this?
It's definitely a balancing act. And it's made even trickier by the fact that the Taliban says it hasn't banned all women from working. They point to the 9,000 work permits they've given out since taking power. But I think we need to look into this a little more closely.
Okay, 9,000 permits. That might sound like a lot at first.
Exactly. But in a country with over 40 million people, that number is actually pretty small. It makes you question what kind of jobs these permits are for. Are they real jobs? Is this just the Taliban trying to look good to the rest of the world? Or are they really committed to letting women work?
It really makes you think about the real impact of those permits. This DW article also mentioned Afghan women who are traveling all the way to Scotland to study medicine. They can't study at home. That's just one story. But it says a lot, don't you think?
Absolutely. It really shows what's called a brain drain. Talented people are leaving the country because of these policies. Afghanistan is losing its potential future doctors, engineers, and leaders. And this loss is especially hard on women, who aren't allowed to contribute to their country's growth
Mm-hmm.
and development. Yeah, it's really sad to see all that talent going to waste, but it's also inspiring, you know? These women are so determined to achieve their dreams, they're willing to go so far.
It really is inspiring. This whole situation makes me wonder, though, what's the Taliban's reasoning behind these rules? They say they're based on Islamic law and Pashtunwali. But that seems like a pretty general explanation. Can you give us a bit more insight into that?
Sure. To really get the Taliban's point of view, you have to understand the complexities of Pashtunwali. It's this pre-Islamic code of conduct. It's really ingrained in Pashtun culture. And it puts a big emphasis on things like honor, hospitality, revenge, and courage. It also includes really strict social rules about women, focusing on protecting them and keeping them separate within the family.
So they're basically mixing religious ideas with cultural traditions to justify these restrictions. But doesn't that cause some problems? Especially when the international community criticizes their actions?
Oh, absolutely. The Taliban sees any criticism from outsiders as an attack on their independence and their way of life. It's a clash of values and worldviews, which makes finding common ground almost impossible.
So is there any hope for change? Is this situation just stuck?
It's definitely a challenge. But I wouldn't say there's no hope. Change is always possible. It just might take time. And it might come from unexpected places. One possibility is pressure from within Afghan society itself. You have all these brave activists, educators, and everyday people. who are quietly but constantly challenging things.
That's a good point. We often hear about the restrictions, but we don't hear as much about the people fighting back.
Right. And it's important to remember that the Taliban isn't one big unified group. There are different factions within the movement. Some are more extreme than others. Internal disagreements and power shifts, those could create opportunities for change.
That makes sense. Are there any external pressures that could influence the Taliban stance?
For sure. Pressure from neighboring countries, who have their own interests in Afghanistan. Even Islamic scholars offering different interpretations of religious texts could have an impact. For example, some Islamic scholars have argued that educating women is not only allowed, but actually encouraged in Islam. Interpretations like that. They could weaken the Taliban's justifications for their policies.
That's really interesting. So, change is possible, but it's going to be slow and complex. And there are no easy answers, it seems like. Understanding all these details is really important for anyone who wants to engage with this issue in a meaningful way.
Absolutely. What we need here is informed empathy. Not just recognizing the suffering caused by these policies, but also trying to understand the historical context, the cultural nuances, and the different perspectives that shape this complicated reality.
And that brings us back to the human cost of these policies. We've talked about women having to go abroad for education, but what about the everyday lives of the women who stay in Afghanistan?
For a lot of Afghan women, life under these restrictions is incredibly difficult. Imagine not being able to leave your home without a man with you. Imagine not being able to get an education or a job, and always being afraid of being punished for breaking even the smallest rules. It's a reality that's hard to grasp, especially for those of us who live in societies where we have these freedoms.
It really makes you realize the privileges we take for granted. But even in the face of these hardships, there are stories of resilience and resistance, right?
Of course. Despite everything, Afghan women are still finding ways to contribute to their communities, whether it's through secret schools for girls, or small businesses run from their homes, or just by supporting each other through tough times. Their bravery and determination really show the strength of the Afghan people.
Hearing that gives me some hope. What does all this mean for the international community, though? What can they do to support Afghan women and push for positive change?
That's the big question, isn't it? There's no easy answer. But continued diplomatic pressure is really important.
But haven't sanctions and isolation failed in the past?
You're right, those strategies haven't worked the way we hoped. But there are other options to consider. It's crucial to find ways to support Afghan civil society organizations working on the ground.
How can we do that effectively when the Taliban controls the country?
It's tricky, but not impossible. Some organizations are managing to operate under the radar, providing essential services and support to women, while still navigating the Taliban's restrictions. We need to pay attention to these grassroots efforts and support them.
It sounds like a delicate balance, providing aid without accidentally making the Taliban stronger.
Exactly. And that leads us to another potential tool: economic incentives, targeted economic assistance, structured in a way that bypasses the Taliban and directly benefits the Afghan people. That could be really powerful.
Can you explain that a bit more?
Sure. Think about microfinance programs that empower women entrepreneurs, or vocational training initiatives that give women the skills they need to get jobs, even within the limitations of the current restrictions.
Those sound promising, but wouldn't that require some cooperation from the Taliban?
It might. That's why these approaches need to be carefully planned. It's about finding ways to empower the Afghan people, especially women, while minimizing the risk of strengthening the Taliban's control.
It sounds like navigating this situation effectively requires a deep understanding of Afghan society, its internal dynamics, and the complex relationships between cultural, religious, and political forces.
You're absolutely right. It's a multi-layered challenge, and we need a nuanced approach. There's no quick fix, but a combination of diplomatic pressure support for civil society and strategic economic initiatives could create the right conditions for real progress.
Yeah, it sounds like the international community really needs to think carefully about what to do. It's not just about criticizing the Taliban, it's about finding ways to help the Afghan people and creating opportunities for change. I'm really struck by this idea of empowering Afghan women through economic programs. It feels like investing in their potential could be a game changer. What do you think?
I totally agree. Afghan women are incredibly resilient and determined. Even with all these restrictions, they're finding ways to contribute to their families and their communities. Imagine what they could achieve if they had access to education, resources and opportunities to participate fully in society, supporting their entrepreneurial spirit, their desire to learn, and their natural talents. That's how we can make a real difference.
It's a good reminder that this isn't just a story of oppression and hardship. There's hope and resilience here, too.
Yeah,
And the spirit of the Afghan people, especially the women, is really inspiring.
exactly. And that brings us to a question for you, our listener. Given how deeply rooted the Taliban's ideology is and the complexities on the ground, what strategies do we know that UN and other countries could use to effectively support Afghan women's rights and well-being? What would a truly effective approach look like?
That's a tough question. But by engaging with these issues and understanding the nuances of the situation, we can contribute to a more informed and thoughtful global conversation. Maybe that's where real change starts, with each of us thinking about these difficult questions and looking for ways to make a positive impact.
Well said. It's a complicated situation, but understanding is the first step toward action. And any action, no matter how small, can make a difference. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive. We hope it's given you the information and motivation to stay engaged, stay informed, and use your own voice to advocate for a more just and compassionate world.